This story is about a guy who lost the ability to walk as a child, but as an adult he discovered one interesting ability in himself: absolute intimidation. Thanks to this ability, everyone who tries to resist him and loses becomes his wards. There are many ambiguous situations in his life in which he can at any moment receive from people who are physically stronger than him, for example, from a fruit merchant and his friends. At such moments, Ching Xian Yun, the hero's childhood friend, comes to his aid, and in their duet the guy himself is the brain, and the hands carrying out his plans are this girl with excellent fighting skills. She accused the merchant of selling such a fruit, which paralyzed the hero. The guy's goal was dominance over the entire region, and he confidently walked toward this goal, stirring up a conflict with the owner of the fruit shop. The man did not like Ching Xian Yun's accusation. He did not understand how some fruit could lead to the loss of a limb. The merchant had been running his business for a very long time. He was not going to explain himself to the young people, so their presence near the shop began to irritate him, and besides, a delivery of fresh fruit was coming very soon. The man stood up from his seat and clenched his fists, warning the teenagers. Of course, this absolutely did not stop Ching Xian Yun, who just gave her a reason to measure her strength. Under a battle cry, the protagonist's company rushed to attack a group of friends led by the shop owner. But no fight happened. It was all just a distraction. During it, young people took away boxes and bags of fruit in the blink of an eye. They immediately started to run away with the stolen goods. What happened greatly shocked their opponents, and put them into a silent stupor for some time. The merchant sounded the alarm when he discovered that almost everything was missing from the shelves. This turn of events infuriated him. He ordered his men to catch up with the thieves, and they, of course, did not argue with him and rushed in pursuit. Meanwhile, Ching Xian Yun, behind the shop owner's back, handed some piece of paper to the main character, for which he praised her. At first the man did not understand what it was. The grinning guy turns this piece of paper, which was a license to trade. It turned out that his goal was not to steal all the goods, but precisely this piece of paper. The main character did not stop there. He called the city department by phone and reported that he had discovered an illegal point of sale, and the former owner of the shop did not expect this, because it was truly vile. The police arrived in a matter of minutes. This became a victory for the protagonist, because everything went exactly according to his plan. Meanwhile, a delivery truck was driving down the West Street. A man named Takumi was driving the truck with a cigarette in his mouth. His younger sister Natsuki was in the passenger seat. At that time she was worried that they were given an overweight load, but Takumi did not share her worries. The girls' worries were not in vain. When approaching the desired address, they found a police car. Panic began inside the truck. Natsuki and Takumi were clearly very unlucky today. After changing gear, the driver decided to turn into the alley at high speed, thereby showing his sister what drifting is. The truck turned very sharply at a right angle, and at the same moment black tracks from the wheels appeared on the asphalt, and smoke from friction began to pour out. Around the bend, the main character was in a wheelchair. He heard a noise and turned around, trying to understand what was happening. Takumi did not take this moment into account. Both people in the truck were very scared. Natsuki offered her brother the only solution in this situation: turn the steering wheel to the side. The picture he saw greatly shocked and frightened the hero, and for a split second he froze in a stupor. He clearly didn't intend to say goodbye to life so easily. So using a secret technique, the speed of rotation of the wheel with the hand of a lone person, the guy tried to avoid a fatal collision with the truck. But luck turned away from the hero at that moment. There was an apple under the wheel, one of those that rolled out of some box. It prevented him from moving further. The guy froze in horror and the memories that came flooding back to him. He saw how the brother and sister hugged each other in the cab of the truck, saw that they completely stopped looking at the road and seemed to surrender to the will of fate. At that moment the hero remembered that the speed of a sakura leaf falling is 5 centimeters per second. At that moment, the boy was hit by a truck speeding at high speed. There was no chance of survival. No one knows what awaits us after death. The main character was lucky enough to be transported to another universe, to a completely different world. The guy suddenly opened his eyes. He was lying on a soft white bed in the same white robe. Hanging over him was a blonde girl unknown to him, who was glad that his death was quick and successful. Of course, this development of events greatly puzzled the hero. He had no idea who was standing in front of him, but what shocked him most was that he could move his legs again. The girl was able to explain this. because at the moment he was just a spirit, and he did not have a physical body. However, the guy did not want to listen to her and began to demand that the stranger introduce herself. The girl considered this behavior rude and snapped her fingers. The hero's hand crumbled into many translucent pieces. A light shone around the stranger, and she deigned to introduce herself. It turned out that she was the editor-in-chief, a creator goddess who could easily kill him. Without joking, she told him that he was a comical hero who had just died in his previous world. There could be no cheats in a normal world, just as the guy was not the main character of reality. The hero's delusions of grandeur were off the charts. He was going to rule the world, reach the top, so he couldn't just die. The girl beamed and reassured him, saying that all the strong are destined to die, and if he wants to be on top, then the creator goddess can give him a chance to be reborn. The guy didn't believe this, to which the girl replied that she was a goddess and could definitely pull this off. These words gave the hero confidence, so he decided that he could ask this creator for everything that he lacked in his previous life: healthy limbs and a flexible body, and better yet, the ability to restore his body even if bones were broken. His request gave the goddess pause, but she eventually agreed to his wishes. In his dreams, the guy already saw himself as a strong, pumped-up man in a superhero costume. He imagined that now he would definitely rule the world. Noticing the boy's impatience, the goddess decided to send him to the new world immediately, saying that she believed that he would reach the top and that his spirit could live indefinitely. But the hero did not want to stop only at these requests. He tried to ask her for something else, but he didn't have time to do this and disappeared in the same place where he stood. The goddess has already sent him to a new world in which death will mean the end. The guy found himself at the very bottom of the sea, so the first thought was that he would immediately drown. Suddenly he realized that he could breathe, but at the same time he felt something very strange. His gaze fell on the unusual bright blue crystals that were located not far from him. Then he decided to use them as a mirror and began to peer carefully. In the reflection, he saw that he had become a small pink squid with huge eyes. This terrified him, causing him to scream underwater. Horror gave way to anger at the creator goddess who dared to make him like this. There was nothing to do, that is, so it was necessary to get used to the new body. To do this, the hero managed to remember how aquarium squids moved in his previous world. The next moment something very strange began to happen. A large school of small fish was quickly swimming away somewhere. Very soon the newly made squid realized that they were swimming away from a huge sperm whale, for which he himself was a favorite delicacy. This information plunged him into wild horror, because right now his new life could easily end. Suddenly the sperm whale spoke, which surprised the main character even more. The hero breathed a sigh of relief, thinking that he could come to an agreement with him. But the predator only thought about how he wanted to eat his prey, which led the squid to the conclusion that the sperm whale lacked mental abilities. In a panic, the hero tried to understand why he did not have any special abilities, to which he received information from somewhere unknown that only the initial skills of a reborn object were available to him. So the squid decided to simply shoot ink and escape. Only this turned out to be absolutely useless. The sperm whale began to pull him into its huge mouth, which made the hero think that the end had come for him. The predator's mouth closed, swallowing the squid. 10 minutes later, the reborn hero was still trying to survive. Holding on to the inner walls of the monster with his suction cups, he encouraged himself that in his previous life he was disabled and even then he was able to reach the top. However, he could not hold out for long. The energy was running out, the tentacles were weakening. Eventually he broke away from the wall. He was inexplicably drawn somewhere upward. It turned out that the nostrils of a sperm whale were located there. The squid's strength was running out due to lack of oxygen, just like the monsters. The squid could not allow the sperm whale to rise to the surface and replenish its oxygen supply, because this would mean the complete defeat of the hero. Therefore, he quickly rushed to the breathing hole and blocked it with his body. The sperm whale clearly did not expect such a turn of events. He emerged to the surface, bending his whole body. Then he dived and jumped out into the air again, trying to somehow breathe. The poor squid tried hard to prevent this predator from continuing its life, sincerely wishing it a speedy death. Ultimately, the squid won. The dead sperm whale slowly sank to the bottom of the sea, belly up. Realizing this, the hero squeezed through the predator's breathing hole to freedom. He was sincerely glad that he survived. At full speed he rushed out of here as quickly as possible. Having sailed to a safe distance, the squid realized that the goddess did say one useful thing. Even the strong are destined to die because of the slightest flaw. At this moment, something incomprehensible began to happen in the water. The sperm whale's body began to crumble into small shining particles. These particles were drawn into the small body of the squid. It was his reward for defeating a stronger opponent that he wanted to see. But the system did not allow this to be done, since it was not activated. It could only be activated after concluding a spiritual contract with the Atlanteans. Of course, the hero understood absolutely nothing. He began to be indignant at why the heartless system did not give him the rewards he deserved. At this time the squid was on a shallow coral reef. The system told him that his inkjet had been improved, so he decided to try it out. During the experiment, it turned out that only the spray area of the ink cloud changed. The hero was not at all happy with this situation. He became very angry and began to be indignant at why he was not given any special effects. Suddenly, some sounds were heard not far from him. The hero became alert and called out to the unknown supposed enemy, after which he bravely shouted into the void to get him out. Sounds were heard again. Something moved between the stones. From there came other little squids that looked exactly like him. All the anger instantly subsided. The hero hesitantly greeted his new acquaintances. The squids began to admire him, delighted that he alone defeated their worst natural enemy, the sperm whale. He thought he could tell them about the whole situation. That's why he asked them about certain Atlanteans who were supposed to unlock his level-up system. But new acquaintances, as expected, have not heard anything about them. Because of this, the hero considered them extremely narrow-minded. Since they didn't know the answer to his questions, it's time to ask them a little about what this place is and what squids do in general. The answer was very unusual. The squids collected pearl shells and handed them over somewhere. This news struck the hero, and for a second it seemed to him as if he had been reborn in the so-called catch-the-sea simulator. Suddenly a voice was heard, which greatly excited the newly made acquaintances. The squids hurried to hide as quickly as possible, completely confusing the hero. It turns out that rotten fish and rotten shrimp forced the squids to collect seashells, and always punished them if they did not manage to collect enough in the allotted time. A moment later, certain rotten fish and rotten shrimp showed up and forced the squids to collect shells. The hero looked out of his hiding place a little and saw a sea catfish named Nyen and a lobster named Guan. The sea catfish boasted that he had connections, and the lobster praised him. The squid was very surprised by the fact that the sea inhabitants also collect tribute. The lobster was very angry that the little inhabitants, his subordinates, were hiding from him, so he hit the rocks under which they were hiding with force with his claw. He furiously began to demand money from the frightened squids right away. The hero was very surprised by how disgustingly this red seafood spoke, just like a convicted felon. It seemed funny to him that only the stronger seafood blackmails the weaker and frightened ones. Our protagonist remembered the conversation that these rotten fish and shrimp had, which helped him realize that the key to growing his own power lies in the Coral City. The inaction of the little squids again angered the lobster, so he, losing his temper, stuck his claw under a stone and grabbed one of the squids by its tentacle, thereby causing great pain. Guan began to demand a monthly payment of 300 shells from the frightened squid he caught, which he, of course, had no trace of. The main character realized that it was with these shells that the so-called tribute to these creatures was paid, and also that this world, with its laws, is not much different from his past life. However, he himself had his own business that he, of course, needed to do, so he began to crawl out of his hiding place. Guan and Yen were surprised to see a squid of unknown color. The hero did not expect such surprise at his appearance, so he only looked questioningly at his enemies. The sea catfish hastened to explain to him that they are very important people at the bottom of the sea, that they must be greeted when they meet. However, he did not do it with just words, raising his fin to the squid and hitting it. The lobster also joined in with his friend, threatening to break him so that the newcomer would learn this lesson as best as possible. Of course, this turn of events absolutely did not suit the main character, therefore, making great efforts, he began to quickly evade all enemy attacks. He understood that the difference in their sizes was too great. It was necessary to find a way to escape. But the lobster and the catfish did not really understand this. The only thing they understood for sure was that this newcomer intended to escape from them, which the lobster clearly was not going to allow. Accelerating, Guan rushed straight at the frightened squid, raising his healthy claw over it. She almost instantly achieved her goal, catching the hero's struggling little body on the fly. The lobster brought it closer to the catfish and said that his debt would not be 300 shells at all, but 900, which only made the main character angrier, laying out everything that had happened to him over the last short period of time. The sea catfish did not understand what he was talking about, and the smug lobster confidently said that the squid was talking nonsense because they scared him. Taking advantage of the moment, the squid used its improved inkjet ability, considering that these seafood were too rough. This confused the enemies, blinded them, and then made them remember that squids, it turns out, are, in principle, capable of this and that. Now this newcomer will run away. Naturally, this is why the hero sprayed this ink, so with effort, he managed to free himself from the lobster's claw. Very soon he realized that he had sprayed too much ink, and now he had no idea where he had floated to. That is why he stumbled upon something. A discharge of severe pain ran through his body, bringing the tentacles together. He was not used to his new body, the body of a squid, so he saw absolutely nothing in his own ink. At that moment, something unexpectedly touched one of his tentacles, which, of course, scared him. But soon he saw that it was another squid, one of his new acquaintances, who pulled him out of this healthy ink cloud. The other two squids waved at them from under the stones, sincerely worried about their comrades. The hero and his savior climbed under the stones with them. They were surprised that they did not run away. The squids, in turn, admired his spraying ability. But they clearly did not have time to talk, they needed to run. The main character took this as a joke, because in his previous life he never ran away before repaying others for what they did to him. He swam back to the lobster and catfish, who were still in the ink cloud and still completely unable to see anything around them. A vengeful light lit up in the squid's eyes. He decided that for the fact that they had offended him, he would repay them doubly. To carry out his plans, he needed a plan. So the hero began to look around in search of suitable objects for this. The right thought was prompted by green algae that grew between the stones and corals not far from the hero. The squid's gaze became even more unkind from the idea that appeared in his head. But at that moment the lobster took decisive action, its claw emerging from the ink cloud. Following her, Guan himself came out, flashing his gold tooth and frowning unkindly. Having left the cloud, he almost immediately noticed some movement behind the stone, and looking closer, he realized that it was the moving tentacle of one of the squids. This provoked the lobster. He grinned and rushed towards this stone at speed. With a threat, he flew behind this stone. His eyes sparkled with madness. The lobster wanted death for these squids for what had just happened to him, and the catfish. But then a big surprise awaited him. Algae began to entwine his body, and the main character swam up from behind with a crazy look. The lobster fell into the trap, and the squid ordered his new friends to pull on this algae. 3 squids unanimously and forcefully pulled the ends of the green underwater plants. The lobster was stupefied by this turn of events, not understanding what was going on here. The main character felt like a winner in this battle. He mocked the enemy who fell into his trap. However, as always, everything did not go according to plan. The algae captured the squid itself. The lobster and the hero were pressed against each other by seaweed, which both did not expect at all. Realizing what had happened, he tried to stop the 3 squids, who were strenuously pulling the ill-fated plants upon themselves, by shouting. Fortunately, they heard the cry of their new friend, so the next moment they stopped, puzzled, and turned around. They saw the following picture: a stunned lobster along with a squid, bound by algae, lying on its side at the bottom. At that moment, Guan came to his senses and, looking at the squid, blushed deeply, which puzzled the second one. The hero, puffing out his cheek, thought not very flatteringly about his new friends. But he didn't manage to sulk for long, because a brilliant idea came into his bright head. He's a squid, a mollusk. Therefore, tensing his entire small body, the main character tried to get out of the grip of the algae. And of course, thanks to its very flexible body structure, everything worked out. The squid was free, which he was incredibly happy about and very pleased with himself. The lobster quietly began to ask to let him go, but the squids did not hear his pleas at all, rejoicing with all their might at their small victory. The expression on the protagonist's face became frightening. He said threateningly that this would happen to anyone who decided to contact him. This phrase and subsequent actions greatly frightened the squids. They did not understand what was happening and what the hero was going to do. Within seconds, all 3 were bound by the same green algae, the same as the lobster had been bound earlier. The main character was glad that now he didn't have to suffer anymore because of these idiots. The next moment, he received a message from the system that his set of skills had now been replenished with strengthening of his arms and legs, which would help him cope with objects 20 times heavier than his own body. This greatly distracted the squid, so it completely did not notice someone's huge shadow hanging over it from behind. However, this shadow was noticed by a lobster and 3 squids, which the main character managed to tie, trying to convey to him with mooing sounds and frightened looks that he was in danger. Behind him stood an angry sea catfish with folded arms, but the squid stubbornly refused to take the mooing of its victims seriously. It only angered him. Of course, Nyen took advantage of the situation and set out to silently absorb his prey, filtering the water streams. The hero had a strange bad feeling, the nature of which he could not understand. At that moment, the sea catfish closed its jaws in the place where the squid had just been, but it instinctively managed to swim away a little. Grinning viciously, the huge fish praised its prey, saying that it was clearly not an ordinary squid. But this did not reduce his rage, but only made him even more angry and provoked, so it would be worth preparing for a fight. At that moment, the catfish made a sudden lunge at the squid, thereby greatly frightening the hero himself, and 3 individuals of his species, and even the lobster. He thought that he was not at all good at fighting, that in a past life it was not he who did this at all, but his childhood friend, who swung her fists or a bat in any brawl. The image of a girl with a bat in her hands brought the hero to a bright thought that was supposed to help him get out of the current situation. The hero quickly rushed to the lobster lying in a lair and bound by seaweed, thinking that it was time to try out his new ability, reinforced arms and legs. With the power of thought, he activated this ability, which even made the small pink tentacles seem to grow a little larger. Having grabbed the healthy tail of the lobster with them, the squid forcefully pulled it towards itself, helped in this by its ability to suck on and lift objects that are 20 times heavier than its own weight. Of course, the lobster didn't like this at all. Moreover, he didn't even understand what this little pest was up to. Thus, the protagonist upgraded his girlfriend's bat into a strike from a seaweed-bound and screaming lobster, calling it a seafood home run, which slammed into a sea catfish at high enough speed. From such force, Nyen bent all over and quite quickly flew away from the squid in the opposite direction, and Guan's healthy claw was separated from her body. With a terrible crash, the sea catfish crashed into an underwater rock, small and large stones and fragments of coral scattered along the bottom. Such a blow left a hole in the rock in which the healthy body of the fish was stuck, and no matter how hard he tried, he was completely unable to get out of there, especially since he had absolutely no idea where he was at the moment. The stunned Guan at that moment tried to understand why Nyen hit him, and the bound squids, meanwhile, admired the coolness of what was happening and the hero himself. With a terrifying expression on his face, the squid patted the lobster on the face, making him very scared. It looked like the main character had gotten a taste for it. Having released the lobster, the squid swam to a claw lying in the distance, took it by the protruding broken bone and dragged it towards the owner of the limb with the same expression on its face, frightening and vengeful. However, he was definitely not going to return it to him, but carried it with a grin to the sea catfish stuck in the rock. With his claw he reached straight to the innermost place of every living being in every world. Turning to the former owner of the claw, the main character grinned disgustingly, trying with words to force the lobster not to be serious, but to smile. The lobster was horrified by what the squid was going to do to the sea catfish with its red claw and began to beg the sadist not to do it. Meanwhile, Stuck Nyen had absolutely no idea what was happening outside, did not understand why it suddenly became so quiet there, and the next moment the squid, bursting into evil laughter, began poking at that very spot with its healthy claw at high speed. From the pain that pierced the catfish, he screamed wildly. His eyes almost fell out of their sockets. The seawater around the fish's tail was stained with blood, as was the broken-off lobster claw. Its former owner hid in panic and hysterics at the bottom, looking in horror at the brutal actions of the little evil squid. 3 small squids, who also watched everything that was happening on the seabed, were also horrified. The sea catfish continued to scream in this cave, twitching in agony, thereby gradually destroying the walls of the rock, but despite the pain, a blush appeared on his cheeks. Tears appeared in Nyen's eyes, and he, wanting to take revenge on his offender, decisively used his special skill, secreting mucus. A foul-smelling green liquid began to come out from the scales on its tail, which, of course, the squid, which was very close to that place, really didn't like. This mucus, as it turned out, was secreted not only on the tail, but throughout the body, so the catfish began to diligently slip out of its trap. The squid noticed this and tried to stop him, but the wounded sea catfish did not care much about everything that was shouted at him from behind. In the end, he managed to free himself from his trap, so he, without stopping for a second, began to quickly get away from here, which upset the squid, but did not encourage it to swim after him. For defeating the rotten fish, the hero was given a new reward, after which he approached the remaining sea inhabitants, who, being tied up, could not follow Nian Xiaochuan's example. With an angry expression on his face, the squid informed them that even though he received the reward, he was still unhappy. His flexible pink tentacle pointed menacingly at the lobster, to which the hero said that now it was the red seafood's turn to accept its fate. This caused the lobster to panic greatly. He believed that the newcomer was too cruel to him, so he only had one choice. He hit his head on the bottom and screamed that he had followed the wrong leader for half his life, and began to beg for mercy, for a chance to correct his mistakes and follow the new leader, this little squid. This put the main character into a stupor. He began to try to stop the verbal flow of this lobster. Guan looked at him sadly, awaiting his terrible sentence. Mentally, the hero exhaled, realizing that he had just almost gotten into trouble, although he only wanted to scare the lobster, so he said that he could just spare it. However, in return, he will have to tell the squid everything that he himself knows. The lobster beamed, ready to do anything for freedom. Meanwhile, some events were taking place in the aforementioned Coral City. A terribly wounded sea catfish got to the main palace on the carpet of the terrible boss, who began to cry and beg him to take revenge for everything that was done to him. He told the master that the squid made him look like a loser, that he didn't care at all who Xiao Chuan's boss was. But the terrible boss didn't care much what his subordinate was babbling there. He was angry with him for returning empty-handed, without treasures, and even losing the battle to some nonentity outside the city. The sea catfish tried to make excuses that he was too weak, but if an agreement had been concluded, everything would have been completely different. The victory would definitely have been his. His boss realized that he wanted to achieve the so-called dual interaction, and unexpectedly agreed to his request. He said that he would help the catfish find the second one, and when Xiao Chuan became stronger, he would take revenge himself. But there was, of course, a condition that he was going to voice at the moment when he took the servant by the long-suffering tail. The sea catfish had to get rid of all the garbage that lived outside the city, and under no circumstances reveal the identity of the boss. The monster let go of Xiao Chuan, who slammed to the floor, and meanwhile his boss continued his monologue, saying that he now lives in solitude, so he needs to create another way to transmit information to his subordinates. He invited contractor Nian into the hall, and told him to accompany the sea catfish to resolve some matters, while a suspicious grin shone on the face of this new person. Nian took the catfish to the utility room, and it followed him with some awe on his tired and exhausted face. Entering the room, Nian suddenly stopped and turned around, noticing another person present nearby. This person present turned out to be Chiu Rong, Nian's mother-in-law, a madam from a wealthy family. She was an invincible old woman who scolded her own subordinates and also mocked the sea animals. She was nicknamed Mama Rome. The appearance of the old woman greatly excited and worried Nian. He raised his hand in greeting, intending to say hello, while in his thoughts he shouted why the hell she forgot here. He was not allowed to finish his greeting, because Mama Rome gave him a strong slap in the face, almost knocking all the spirit out of him. Of course, Nian did not like this action very much. He grabbed his cheek, which was burning with pain, and indignantly asked the old woman why she hit him. There was no adequate answer from Rong's mother. The woman burst into a tirade about how she felt sick at the sight of a guy, that her son-in-law Nian had not earned a single pearl shell, and began to use as an example her acquaintances who lived luxuriously, and wondered why this old woman had everything completely different. In his thoughts, the guy wondered why they blamed him, although it was Chiu Rong herself who tortured the past animals. All this greatly frightened the sea catfish who was watching the scene. He firmly decided that he would never sign a contract with this crazy woman. At that moment, Chiu Rong noticed the catfish and pointed at it, calling it a new sea animal, which further frightened the poor catfish, which had already begun to call for help. But the merciless woman had already pounced on him, bloodthirstily spreading her arms and madly sparkling her eyes. She pressed him to the floor with her body, noticing that he fit perfectly and that she was eager to sign a contract with him. Unfortunately, the sea catfish did not share her passionate desires at all. Nien remained standing behind Chiu-Rong, who at that moment covered his face with his palm and mentally sympathized with him, even prayed, but clearly did not intend to stand up for him at any cost. At this time, Mama Rong called the pink-haired maid, who happened to be nearby at the right time. Her name was Chen Xian Yun. She served the Chiu family from Coral City and once lost her memory. Instead of making any request, Chiu-Rong simply threw her bag in her face and ordered her to carry it home, while the woman herself was about to ride the long-suffering sea catfish. Of course, from such a strong blow the girl fell, her cheek turned red, but she could not disobey the order. Meanwhile, Guan carried the squid on his back to the outskirts of the Coral City. 3 other squids accompanied them, but when they got there, the hero told them not to swim further. At this, the pink seafood breathed a sigh of relief, glad that this scary sea creature was finally gone. The lobster told the squid a little about this world, after which he began to understand a little about the situation he found himself in, and what he should do next. It turned out that Coral City is the center of the sea world, the home of certain Atlanteans, underwater inhabitants who look like people, only they are still able to breathe underwater, and here they have something like a civilization. Outside the city there is all sorts of horror, terrible, bloodthirsty plants, and dangerous other sea animals, so for the common good all inhabitants must sign a contract with the Atlanteans. Squid thought that, apparently, this contract is what his system requires from him, and perhaps he is not the only one in this world who has this system in principle. The lobster looked at the squid sitting on it, and said that they had reached the gates of the city, and here it was quite possible to meet Atlanteans who liked to stroll in this place. He thought about how he used to use balls of silt and sand against the lobster to intimidate it, but now even that is not necessary because the usual threats work, like the fact that there is a poison on its tentacle that the squid can provide an antidote to only if this seafood obeys him. He realized that it looked like he would have to go to Coral City to become stronger and basically learn more about the underwater world. Suddenly the lobster stopped, very surprised by what he saw ahead, and the squid on his back was also surprised. A very sad Nien swam towards them, with Chiu-Rong sitting on his back, who looked at everyone very arrogantly. Guan panicked, saying that this damn fish had found a contractor. The squid did not understand this panic. Very soon the lobster explained to him that this old woman was the terror of all sea inhabitants, and that if they fell into her hands with him, she would simply torture them to death. Of course, she did not like this outcome of events at all. Even more, the squid did not understand why it was reborn in this world, since even here there are people with sadistic tendencies. The lobster continued to panic and wanted to escape, because the old woman had clearly already realized that these two could become her prey. Of course, the squid had no intention of getting into such trouble, so its bright head hastily generated a wonderful idea for salvation. The next moment, he used his flexible brachiopod skill, because squids are mollusks that can deform their bodies. The lobster was stunned by what he saw, because on its back sat exactly the same old woman as on the sea catfish, only slightly modified. For example, the color of the hair, fur coat, and hat was different. Thus, he used 2 skills at once, which added points to his complacency. It was necessary to somehow identify himself in front of Chiu-Rong, so the squid started a casual conversation, hoping that it would be limited to a couple of greeting phrases and compliments, and for this it was only necessary to behave naturally. In response, Chiu-Rong also complimented the squid, while she tried to remember who it was, what kind of woman she was, and whether she was Ah Ching's sister. The sea catfish was also surprised to see that the lobster had acquired a contractor. Guangxi was still very nervous, because at any moment everything could go wrong. However, this did not stop him from accusing Xiao Chuan of abandoning him and running away. Chiu-Rong decided to express her thoughts out loud, because the question of whose sister the main character was worried her very much, just as the squid himself was excited by the very fact that she began to conduct a dialogue with him, which he really wanted to avoid, so he began feverishly wondering who he was going to visit. Thoughts flashed through his head for her to stop her questions, because he just said hello, and it would be very unpleasant if a catfish recognized him, so he had to leave here quickly. The old woman, however, had completely different plans. She told her new friend that she had just come from a party and that she wanted to take a walk with her, so she offered to transfer to a sea catfish, because it turns out to be very fast. Both women sat opposite each other on their sea animals and looked at each other. These glances were literally a battle of life and death. The catfish and the lobster looked puzzled at the blonde woman, the rider of the second, and silence fell. At this moment, Xiao Chuan sniffed, catching some very familiar smell, and, as he soon realized, it was the smell of squid. The catfish was able to distinguish these odors thanks to its tentacles and sense of smell, and it can distinguish such odors at a distance of up to 10 meters. Therefore, he immediately decided to tell his mistress that this blonde woman was actually a sea monster, and not an Atlantean. Such a statement shocked the lobster and the squid and made them scared. Then events began to develop rapidly, because the stinking fish showed its true colors. The lobster and squid jumped back in horror as Chiu Rong and Nian looked at them menacingly. Cursing, the lobster reminded Nian that he had forgotten about his old friends, glaring at him angrily while the squid continued to sit on the lobster's back and glare aggressively at the catfish. Sam grinned disgustingly and said that everyone serves his master, and he shouldn't be blamed. Chiu Rong joyfully exclaimed that these were indeed two wild sea animals. Looking at the lobster and squid, the old woman contentedly rubbed her hands in white gloves. Then she smiled ominously, looking menacingly at the heroes from under black glasses. The woman was delighted at such luck, because none of them wanted to leave. Guanxi backed away in fear. Looking at the woman in fear, she treated the sea creatures badly, so if they fell into her hands, they would both die. The squid jumped from the back of the lobster to the ground, declaring that they would fight her using the old techniques. The lobster looked at the squid dumbfounded, but did not have time to ask what techniques the squid was talking about. Guanxi began to run away in tears when the squid grabbed one of its limbs with its tentacles. Off-screen, the old woman was surprised that the lobster was running away. Chiu Rong climbed onto the head of the catfish, taking a threatening stance. Just like Nian, blue ribbons of light fluttered around them, encasing them both in a cocoon. The old lady triumphantly declared that the two sea animals dared to take on too much. They were using the art of shuang at this time. Chan. The lobster screamed pitifully that he would become a weapon and begged not to touch him, while in the background the old woman and the catfish flashed orange. The squid was surprised by such a bright light, not understanding what the art of shuang Chan was. A new creature was formed from the combination of an old lady and a catfish. He became bald and became stronger when he used the shuang Chan technique. His status changed to a human mermaid, and his character level increased to 10. He stated that he became bald and became stronger. He thought that will use a fist-fighting technique with an ultra-high temperature that destroys heaven and earth, which will immediately cook the sea animals. The squid screamed in shock and horror, not understanding what was happening here. He continued to hold the lobster with his tentacles. The creature grinned, punching his palm, and asked if the animal was stunned by his power, turning to the squid. The hero recoiled in disgust and horror, asking the mermaid man if he would go bald using the shuang Chan technique, because in that case he would not recommend using it. The mermaid man swung his fist in rage, indignant because the squid dared to mock him, and now he demands a fight with him. He struck the water using an ultra-high temperature fist-fighting technique. Guanxi was surprised that steam formed under the water after the strike. The squid shielded itself from the blow behind the lobster, which, crying, declared that it was not a shield for it. From a strong and powerful blow, the heroes were thrown in different directions by a hot stream of water and steam. The squid and blackened lobster fell to the bottom between the corals. Guanxi was boiled. The squid looked at him in shock, and it flashed through his mind that it was too cruel to use a fist-fighting technique. A mermaid man appeared behind him, swinging at the squid, surprised that it was still alive. The mermaid man began to scream and deliver multiple blows, grinning tensely. The squid managed to escape from the hail of fist blows before the mermaid man noticed. The hero used an ink jet, flying it away from the attacker. The mermaid man called the squid naive because he uses the same technique twice. He raised his fist, from which streaks of blue light began to spread, as during his transformation, declaring that he would erase the entire area with ink at once. Looking gloomily ahead, the squid looked at this process in surprise, thinking that things were bad, and it was time to run away without looking back, because the attacker was gathering strength before striking. The hero quickly swam to the boiled lobster, repeating that he needed to get to that place. The mermaid man struck hard by using an ultra-high temperature fist-fighting technique. His impact created a gigantic stream of hot water and steam, destroying everything in its path. The squid looked at the stream in horror, fearing for its own life. Everything around, hiding the main character behind it. The mermaid man declared that this power was worthy of his. Of course, he was very pleased with himself. Suddenly, Chiu Rong and the sea catfish split from human mermaid into their normal forms. The old lady looked at her hands incomprehensibly. Because the Shuang-chan technique lasted for so long, she said that it was the loser's son-in-law who sent these stupid little fish. The catfish silently looked at Chiu Rong, because the duration of the Shuang-chan technique depends on both sides. Sam continued to look displeasedly at the old woman, thinking that she had so many things to do that she couldn't handle it herself. Suddenly he heard a sound, turned around sharply and looked in surprise towards its source. There was a huge hole in the rock from the blow of the mermaid man, in front of which lay a boiled lobster. Mama Rong exclaimed that this technique was truly great since it destroyed rocks. Looking at the boiled lobster, the sea catfish asked why they were so tasty. But the old woman wondered why there was only one and where was the second animal. Looking for it on the seabed, Chiu Rong took the lobster by the tail, joyfully declaring that they would eat such a lobster for a very long time, and there was no need to cook it. She climbed onto the back of her animal along with the lobster, and told him to quickly go home. The catfish sighed tiredly, bending under the weight on his back. He moved his whiskers and thought he could still smell the squid, which was very suspicious. The boiled lobster lay lifelessly in front of the mischievous old woman on the big back of the catfish. Hiding from the stream of hot water, the squid managed to climb into the lobster. The hero exhaled in relief, because if he had not had his hand left, he would have been a corpse. For this technique he used the skill of imitating disguise. Chiu Rong, riding a catfish, rode into the coral city, beautifully decorated with shells and corals. Sea creatures and people walked along the pavement here and there. The old lady and Sam walked through the gate, passing a wall with beautiful pink shells. They found themselves in the coral city. The squid thought that the city looked majestic. He had a feeling that the city was a person. People with their sea creatures and poor people without them were walking along the pedestrian part. A figure in a black cloak stood at one of the columns. The squid quickly turned around, still in the lobster. Chiu Rong looked gloomily at her surroundings. The hero noticed that the rich had sea animals. Young people with domesticated fish were walking along the street, and the poor did not have sea animals. Several poor people walked along the street, heading to the same place. The squid was upset when he realized that in Atlantis only the rich could own sea creatures, and only the highest class people could sign the contract. Mama Rong looked at the window where the poor people were coming. A blond man looked out of it, and gave something to the poor people, and they thanked him. 1. The inscription on the sign said that Uncle Jin's Chamber of Commerce offers help. Each person can receive 10 pearls a month. You just need to register. The squid was surprised that there were charitable organizations here and folded its tentacles. Uncle Jin gave someone a few shells with a smile, offering to return tomorrow. Behind him stood a huge, menacing lobster with spikes on its shell. The poor man happily took the shells and thanked the man. The old woman was indignant, sitting on the catfish, that he was walking so slowly. He just sighed. Jin looked after them from his shop. He looked at the couple gloomily, looking very gloomy and not too pleased. The Chiu family mansion was a majestic building with columns and turrets. It looked like a medieval castle. Mother Rong entered the mansion, holding her purse in her hand. A sea catfish with a lobster on its back followed her, and the maids immediately greeted Chiu Rong. Mama Rong ordered the maids to cook oysters for her, because she was very tired and wanted to fill her stomach well. They went to carry out the order. While the third was waiting for instructions, the catfish looked tiredly and sadly to the side. The squid thought that it had no way to escape, but now Chiu Rong brought it to her home. Suddenly the hero was shaken inside the lobster. He froze in fear. The old lady tossed the lobster to the third maid, ordering her to take it to the kitchen and then prepare dinner from it for the day. The hero was happy to hear this, because he would be able to escape from the kitchen, then explore the coral city and find the contractor. He flew to the maid along with the lobster. Suddenly he saw the maid's face. It turned out to be Ching Xian Yun. The squid looked at her in shock. She carried the lobster into the kitchen, while the hero wondered how she ended up here and whether she had also been reborn. The girl with a lobster in her arms left the living room, where an old woman was sitting on the sofa, who ordered the catfish standing next to him to give her a massage, to which he reluctantly agreed. Xian Yun stood at the kitchen stove, which she was currently turning on, with a boiled lobster lying at the sink. She hummed something, preparing to cook. The squid was glad that he was safe, because there was no one nearby. He noticed that the maid looked exactly like Ching Xian Yun, but she would never have become a maid. The squid folded its tentacles and pouted, wondering if it was worth asking the girl about this. Soon he felt someone's shadow on him and sharply opened his eye, trying to understand what was happening. A girl with an indifferent face and even a slightly cruel face hovered over the lobster with a knife, about to cut it before cooking. The squid was terrified. He screamed out of fear, thereby begging her to wait a little with the reprisal. Frightened, Xian retreated. She thought that the fried lobster could talk. The squid thought that only Xian could react to something like this. The hero used the chameleon camouflage technique and got rid of his disguise. He joyfully looked at the girl and exclaimed that he did not expect to see her here. The girl looked at the squid in a stupor, continuing to hold the knife in her hand. Then she rushed away from the squid, shouting that there was a sea animal. The hero tried to ask her to remain silent, but nothing came of it. The hero jumped forward, trying to force himself to forget that he was in the body of a squid. He jumped on the girl from behind and grabbed her, covering her mouth with his tentacles. They both blushed. The squid admitted that his name was Hua Chang, and he became a squid after reincarnation. The girl asked if he was King Hua Chang. The hero thought that she recognized him and exhaled. Because it would be so nice to know each other, he thought that choosing a girl as his contractor would be a great idea. The squid confirmed that it was him. Then he released the girl's mouth and loosened the grip of the tentacles, releasing Xian from captivity. The girl looked at the squid incomprehensibly and asked who we were talking about. The hero was dumbfounded. The squid screamed in frustration, not understanding why she didn't remember him. He was shocked by this. Views of a gloomy castle. A guy walks through it with a large plate in his hands, on which lie huge larvae, caterpillars and some green plants. He placed the heavy plate on some light surface with a knock. The young man stood at the throne of a huge crocodile-like creature. The creature was looking at the screen of a certain device. The guy asked Lord Moon how long they could endure it. The Lord looked at him, answering that he should not worry and that he should wait until his wound heals, and during this time the Chiu family should not be allowed to know about his existence, and the contractual relationship with him should not be revealed. The Lord continued to speak. 3 months have passed since his rebirth, but he still barely climbs the cactus. An image of a beautiful girl with a golden halo hovering above her head appeared in his head. She said that if he could reach the top in the new world, then his life would become eternal, and otherwise he would no longer exist. Then he thought that it was just time travel. Lord Lunin's clawed paw pressed the roll memo button on his device. He remembered that while fighting it, he discovered something. A character card appeared on the screen, where Jin was depicted. The character's name was listed as James, status Chamber of Commerce owner, contractor, deep sea giant, strength and level unknown. The huge lizard rested his head on his fist, thinking that the biggest threat in this world was a guy who had also been reborn. Opening his shirt and looking at the bandages on his chest, Long noticed that the wound was almost healed. This was good. He told his son-in-law that their plan was to secretly accumulate strength. Lord Crocodile Lun has level 60. And the contract is with Nien. He uses the devil muscle technique for defense, and his attack skill is called Death List. Bright purple rays flashed around the crocodile. He smiled predatorily and declared that they will kill all competitors. Lung slowly turned around, addressing his son-in-law. Stunned, he looked at the place where the guy stood, not understanding where he had disappeared. He was already walking along the bright corridor, complaining that Brother Long always says some kind of confusion, and makes him endure it every day. Lung pulled the worm out of the plate, thinking that his son-in-law was becoming more and more unreasonable lately. In one motion, the crocodile tore the huge larva into 2 parts, biting it off, and as soon as the son-in-law dared to leave right under his nose, despite the fact that he rarely behaves aggressively, Lewin realized that he was still dying of hunger. A plate of sandworms was not enough for him. He would have to go to the kitchen. In short runs the Lord went out into the empty courtyard. Looking around. At the window he heard the voice of the maid. She exclaimed in surprise that they were not from this world. Lewin thought that it could be a time traveler. The squid excitedly told how a dump truck drove out towards him and the girl. He quickly moved his tentacles while the girl listened to him attentively. Lewin overheard the conversation outside the window. Artistically falling onto the kitchen table, the hero declared that he was killed, and he ended up in this world, reborn as a squid. He then jumped up, happily asking if Xian understood his long story. She only laughed in response, wondering whether deceivers could invent such fantastic stories. The squid exclaimed in shock with tears in her eyes that she was so stubborn and did not understand a word. Lounging on the table, he began hysterically hitting it with his tentacles, complaining that he didn't know what to do, because the girl didn't believe him. The note was as follows: owners of the system can freely use it with one finger. A blue screen of the device appeared in front of the hero. The inscription on it said that when signing the conditions, an application for unlockable skills would be available. This greatly surprised the hero, and made him exclaim. The screen unfolded like a long scroll, containing information about what needs to be done to gain skills, that memories of a past life can be unlocked, and much more, a whopping 250 points. Having reached the end of the document, the hero wailed that if he agreed, he must sign an agreement to restore his memory. A beige scroll with obligations appeared from the hero's blue screen. The hero joyfully unfolded it in front of the girl. Showing it, he asked her to put her hand on the scroll in order to conclude a contract and restore her memory of her past life. She recoiled from him, stunned. The girl crossed her arms and frowned, refusing to sign. Because the Coral City police are fighting deception and fraud, she said that some squid could not deceive her, even if she looked like a modest girl. But according to the rules, the squid could not force her to sign the contract. The hero shouted in annoyance that the system was deceiving him, because this condition had not been mentioned anywhere before. A voice was heard, confirming that Xin Yun was speaking correctly. Lord Loon appeared in the doorway, barely able to fit in, and the heroes looked at him in fear. The girl looked in surprise at the squid, then at the crocodile, exclaiming about a gang of scammers. The squid tried to ask something from Lung, but could not, stuttering. Lun smiled good-naturedly, closing the door behind him with a loud bang. He asked them not to be nervous and said that he did not expect to see people like him here, those who were reborn. The squid exclaimed in surprise, stroking the crocodile, asking if he, too, had been reborn. Approaching them, the crocodile turned on his device, saying that sea animals and Atlanteans can use the Shuang-Chan technique with the help of a contract, but the system can only be used by those who have been reborn into a sea animal. He also added that only those reborn can see the system. The girl exclaimed in surprise, looking at the glowing things. The squid was delighted, thinking that since she sees them, then she is reborn and is 100% sure that it is Xin Yun. The hero upsetly asked Lung why his childhood friend did not remember about the rebirth and her past life. The crocodile replied that the memory of some reincarnates is limited, and he does not know the specific reason. The girl huffed irritably, assuming that the two were sick with something. Squid nervously looked at Luna, asking if there were many reincarnated in this world, and if a girl named Nina sent them here. The crocodile's eyes lit up brightly. He smiled predatorily, surprised that the hero knew her too. The girl asked to stop and leave the house as quickly as possible, because if the old lady noticed them, then things would be bad for everyone. Lin flashed his sharp claws, which the hero noticed. He furiously threw his tentacles forward, ordering the crocodile not to approach. The hero quickly pulled Xin Yun away from the monster's claws when it tried to hit her. She screamed in horror when she saw that the sharp claws had torn the top of her dress. The squid jumped forward, covering the girl's chest, causing her to blush and become embarrassed. The hero called the crocodile a killer. Lung confirmed this, declaring that all the reincarnated are his enemies. He pointedly swung his clawed paw, smiling predatorily. Squid worriedly asked if the goddess told him the same thing. He remembered how Nina said that she would send him to a new world where he would have to survive and climb to the very top. Nina also warned that if he died, then traces of his existence would be erased. Luen made sure that the hero also knew about these rules. Luen stood up to his full height and slammed his fist into his palm. His clothes tore into shreds on him. The crocodile smiled ominously, declaring that he would not allow other reincarnates to develop, because only he could be at the peak of the world. The squid shouted furiously that Lung had misunderstood everything. In order to reach the top, it is not necessary to kill others. The hero thought that this opponent's conviction was not as strong as the opponent he had met before. Long grinned predatorily and sarcastically asked if the squid was asking not to kill him and wait for him to rise up and cause trouble. Long had just left Xian Shou village and met the boss who broke his house. Lord Loon attacked the heroes with lightning speed, declaring that they could not live. It flashed through the hero's head that Loon was quite stubborn for starting a fight, and the squid thought, frowning. He noticed that the crocodile's chest was injured, which was only to his advantage. The hero used an ink stream, literally blowing it out of his mouth, Lewin looked at the hero furiously with his sparkling eyes. For him, such a thing was just a trifle. Suddenly, the hero rushed towards Luna, using flexible tentacles to accelerate. This caught the crocodile by surprise. The hero hit the enemy at full speed. A strong blow from the squid made the lord scream in pain and topple over. Flying away with the enemy, the squid shouted to Xian Yun to leave now while he delayed long. The girl looked at this whole picture in fear, unable to move from her place. The huge scaly hand of the angry lizard grabbed the hero. He screamed in pain. Victoriously, Lewin raised the squid above his head and squeezed it with force, until it bled, because someone like him should not touch its wound. Lewin forcefully threw the hero onto the kitchen floor to kill him. The squid began to be tossed across all surfaces of the room like a ball. Xian Yun rushed forward, jumping up from her knees, and barely managed to catch the squid and press it to her chest. The girl fell to the floor, hitting the tile hard with her shoulder, but did not unclench her hands and did not let go of the squid. With tears in her eyes, the girl lifted the hero in her arms, not understanding why he sacrificed his life to save some maid. With the last of his strength, wincing and trembling from severe pain, the hero replied that in a past life he promised to save Xian Yun's life. Frames of her life began to flash before the girl's eyes, and she opened her mouth in amazement. Here the boy joyfully tells the girl that she can trust him with her life, while she cries in fear. The girl looked at the squid in shock, not understanding who he was and asking him to tell her everything. In response, he weakly asked if Xian Yun wanted to make a contract with him. The pink-haired maid shouted what she wanted, because she did not want the squid to die. The system took this as agreement to conclude the contract, since resistance, on the other hand, disappeared. The squid grinned smugly, and even a little sinisterly, and unrolled the scroll in one motion. The girl raised her hand. Some kind of seal lit up above the scroll, and the squid happily declared that everything was ready. Blue stripes of light began to wriggle around Xian Yun and the squid. The girl froze in amazement. The contract was concluded. Lewin cried out in frustration, shielding himself from the bright light that came from the couple. The heroes entered the system space. The guy looked around in surprise and tension, not understanding what was happening here. Xian Yun looked up indifferently, with a blank gaze, while the main character looked around in disbelief. He was surprised, because in the system space he was able to return to his original appearance. Looking at the girl with concern, he asked why she was dumbfounded. He thought that the chain on her head could be a seal. The hero carefully touched the chain, intending to check his assumption. The chain began to glow. He looked at this in surprise, stretched out his hand, and some kind of shining foam began to emanate from the chain. In space, instead of foam, fragments began to spin, through which he saw Xian Yun. He was surprised that he could see the initial world. It puzzled him and made him look around in confusion. The girl called Hua Chang, looking back, because she did not see him next to her. The guy happily stepped towards Xian Yun, extending his hand to her, and saying that he was here. However, she only passed right through, completely not noticing the hero. He froze in horror. Realizing that the girl could not touch him and did not see him, he realized that he was in her memory. Meanwhile, the girl ran to the road to find out about the incident that had happened on the road. Suddenly, a truck with a blue seal on its cab drove out of the bend onto the road. Radiant Nina happily drove the truck, talking about being reincarnated in another world. The goddess with an evil smile rode towards the frightened Xian Yun. Just as the hero thought, it was Nina who forced the girl to be reborn. Xian Yun screamed in fear as she watched the truck approaching her at breakneck speed. Fragments of Xian Yun's happy memories flashed through space. The hero woke up. His and Xian Yun's hands touched with their index fingers and emitted light. The contract was signed. The limit was unlocked. The girl slowly began to open her beautiful eyes, gradually coming to her senses. She looked at Hua Chang in embarrassment, as he looked at her with a smile. He asked her if her memory had returned, continuing to look at the girl with a smile. Xian Yun gave the guy a strong slap in the face, which brought tears to his eyes. The girl screamed at him angrily, because he lied to her again. Her personality was restored, her appearance was beautiful, but deep down in her heart she was sadistic. Xian Yun's memory was restored. The guy awkwardly looked at the girl, making excuses, because it was just a rebirth. Xian Yun puffed displeasedly. She had a lot of memories in her head, and mockingly asked if the guy had been reborn into a little squid. Memories of recent events flashed before the heroes. Xian Yun looked blankly into space. Hua Chan noticed that the girl figured out the system quite quickly, since all her memories were unlocked. He was surprised, because before she was not so smart, but she should not be underestimated, because the girl used to study a lot to be smart. Both heroes came to their senses, the contract began to take effect, and all rewards began to unlock. They received a reward for increasing experience, level 15, and increasing speed. Now the hero could receive a reward for destroying sperm whales. The Shuang Chan Shu Poseidon technique level C was obtained. Huang Chang remembered that this was the same technique that Sam and the fat man used. It was excellent. The heroes militantly called upon the Poseidon technique. A bright blue pillar of light flashed in the kitchen of the mansion. Lord Lin shielded himself from the bright light. He looked with surprise and fear at the heroes who appeared after activating the new power. Nangong Huang Chang and Qing Xian Yun merged into a level 15 contractor. Using the Shuang Chan Shu Poseidon level C technique, they assumed the status of the cursed King Shifan. He calmly and slightly smugly looked at his opponent, preparing to attack. Hua Chan realized that his consciousness was under his control, but he was not sure whether the physical characteristics had changed. Shifan looked forward intently. A very unusual orange stone in the shape of a perfect oval shone in Shifan's forehead. Meanwhile, Xian Yun was in the gem room with a squid on her head. The girl energetically practiced her fighting techniques with warlike cries and a smug smile. Shifan's face expressed irritation and at the same time awkwardness and helplessness, because Xian Yun's personality also had some influence on him. Lung furiously swung his terrible clawed paw at the hero, intending to wound and ultimately kill. Shifan immediately noticed this and prepared to repel the attack, thinking hard about how best to do this. The damned king blocked the lizard's blow, looking intensely at his enemy. Smirking, the lord noticed that his opponent did not have time to study abilities. With irritation, Shifan noticed that fighting with other reincarnates was unfair competition. The crocodile attacked his opponent fiercely, grinning angrily, declaring that he was too self-confident, because even if he used the Poseidon Shuang Chan Shu technique, Long would still lower his level and crush him. Shifan with effort held back the crocodile's attack, because the opponent's level was 60, and his own 15. Shifan understood that his opponent was too strong. He did not want to face an enemy in the form of a boss of such a high level. However, he quickly found a way out of the situation, being under great stress. With a nasty grin, Shifan noticed that Luffy's torso was too open. With the same grin he asked if the wound had healed. The crocodile recoiled in fear, because the enemy had many hands, which could end badly for him. With a dark smile, Shifan attacked the crocodile, causing it to beg, asking him to leave him alone. The cursed king began to strike multiple times, causing his opponent to scream in pain. Lord Lung was foaming at the mouth exhaustedly. His gaze was blank, drops of scarlet blood were everywhere. He collapsed in a heap on the floor where he stood, unable to withstand Shifan's attacks. He noticed, looking at the crocodile, that it was difficult to fight with so many hands. For the victory over the Lord Crocodile, the program promised Ninagrad, which pleasantly surprised the damned king. In the background the screams of an old woman, dissatisfied with the lack of dinner, could be heard. She kicked the catfish, forcing him to hurry up. Their appearance surprised Shifan. Opening the door, the catfish doomedly and very sadly asked the cook to set the table. Shifan, grinning smugly, noted that for enemies, any road is narrow. Their new strong technique Shuang Chan Shu Poseidon S had expired. Xian Yun and Huang Chang separated and fell surprised in different directions. The girl took a fighting stance in bewilderment. She had just fought. The door to the kitchen opened with a disgusting and very loud creak, revealing the darkness of the corridor behind it. Sam looked at the heroes blankly as they froze in place in attacking poses.